We're breaking down the best March Madness performances of all time. Now let's get this show on the road, baby.
Welcome back to Life in the Stands. We got a really exciting episode for you today. We're going to break down some of the best March Madness performances in NCAA history on both the men's and the women's side. We're going to start with a couple of honorable mentions, though, and then we got three each for men's and women's. But let's start with those honorable mentions. We're going to have Caitlin Clark in her 2023 season and Steph Curry in his season with Davidson. But unfortunately just didn't make the national championship, didn't go all the way. So we wanted to include them, but didn't feel like they could fully make the list.
This is the criteria. Got to win the championship.
Yep, that's the criteria. Got to win it all, and probably got to be the best player on that team, just for starters. And then obviously you kind of look at the historical context. So with the honorable mentions out of the way, let's jump into our first on the men's side, and that is going to be Christian Laettner. And this is a name that everybody knows, I think, but some people forget kind of how dominant he was, and everyone thinks about the shot that he made against Kentucky in the Elite Eight, back-to-back national championships. We're going to say that his 1992 season was the most dominant for this list.
Yeah, and let's not forget about his perfect performance with 10 for 10 from field goals and 10 for 10 free throw line. Now I feel like he's a forgotten name because he never really showed out in the pros, and he was that guy on the very, very, very end of the bench of that 92 Dream Team as well for the Olympics. But he should not be overlooked in what he did in his college years.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of going perfect, not only did he go perfect in that Elite Eight game, but he also went 43 for 43 from the free throw line across the entire tournament. So dude was clutch in college. Unfortunately, did not have a great pro career, but let's move on to a guy that did have a great pro career. Maybe not as great as some of us would have expected, but we're going to go Kemba Walker. In 2011 with UConn, averaged over 20 points a game, obviously had the iconic step back against Pitt. And most people don't remember, too, that UConn was kind of a Cinderella to begin with because they had to make a run in the Big East tournament to even make it to March Madness.
Yeah, and I feel like that's the road to March Madness. That's where it all starts, and that's what's happening this upcoming week. A lot of tournament play, a lot of teams need to get in. But Kemba Walker was that dude, and I think that's when everybody realized who he was and what he was going to be, and he showed that in the pros.
Yeah, he definitely did. His pro-style game showed out in college, right? Because he had the step backs, he had the midi, had the handle, could work off a screen. So Kemba was really fun to watch in college, and ended up winning the championship with him in 2011. So let's move on to the last on the men's side, though. We have Carmelo Anthony with Syracuse in 2002. And although Carmelo did not win an NBA championship, he did win it all with Syracuse and was the best player on the team by far doing that.
At least you got something, and of course, we know how lethal he can be, especially ISO game, and I'm happy to see that his kid is also now committed to Syracuse as well, so I can't wait to see that family tree progress. But no, Carmelo Anthony definitely had a dominant March Madness performance, but if I had to choose one guy, I think Kemba Walker had the best of all time.
Yeah, I like Kemba too. I feel like that was closest to our generation as well. So like watching Kemba and what that low-seeded UConn team did was just like that is the like Cinderella run example that comes to mind when I think of like a Cinderella team in the tournament. I think of that UConn team. It was just so fun to watch. But also very excited about Carmelo's kid going to Syracuse. I believe Carmelo actually won them the first national championship they ever had in 2002. I believe that was their first ever for Syracuse. So definitely really significant for that program in general too. But let's move on to the women's side. We're going to jump into three different examples here. And we're going to start with Cheryl Miller, who might be a lesser known name as well, but she helped USC win the national championship in 1983. She averaged close to 30 points a game and 13 rebounds. So she was just absolutely dominant.
For her to average close to 30 in a kind of like a day and age and era where they didn't really use the three-point line as much is honestly insane. And I think she set the gold standard for women's basketball, and still is pretty much the gold standard. Obviously, skill sets are different, but she is the expectation.
I think one thing that stood out to me when I was going back through her film is how good she was on the defensive end. Like there were some games in the tournament where she had, you know, 3 or 4 defensive plays in a row that swung a game, like 2 blocks, 2 steals within a 5 possession stretch that just changed the outcome of the game. So let's move on to the second example we have from the women's side, and that's going to be Arike Ogunbowale in 2018 with Notre Dame. She was super impressive, and I think if you look past her stats, she had 2 buzzer-beating shots to win a game, one in the Final Four and one in the championship game. So in the 2 biggest games of her career at that point, she had game-winning buzzer beaters. I think there's a lot to be said for that if you look beyond the stats.
And that's the most impressive thing to me because it's awesome to have one of those moments in the tournament. And she had 2 in the Final Four and the championship game of all timing. Like, of all the timings you could have had, of all people, like, I'm happy it was her that got those moments and was clutch in those moments. And honestly, I feel like she should be remembered more throughout college basketball history than she is. And definitely deserves her respect.
Yeah, she deserves the respect. I don't think that we're ever going to see another championship run like that with multiple buzzer beaters. And those shots were crazy too. Like they weren't like, oh, like she got a wide open layup with 2 seconds left. Like no, she made like crazy out of bounds, inbound pass, like off balance with the hand in her face jump shots. Like it was not
tough shots.
Tough shots. So lots of credit goes to Arike Ogunbowale. And she's continued on in her pro career and been pretty decent as well. So with the last name on this list for some of the best performances in March Madness of all time in men's and women's, before we jump into this one, I'll remind everyone, Jake is going live on TikTok every day of the week, especially as we get into March Madness. So make sure you jump on and pay attention to those. Lots of good discussions. He even brings people on sometimes and lets them ask questions on the live and talk a little bit too. So make sure you pay attention to those. I want to thank everyone for watching, liking, subscribing. That really helps out the channel and helps us continue to grow and bring more great content like this to you. But with that, let's jump into the last player here. A very well-known player, Brittney Griner. And obviously when she was in college, there was a lot of noise because she had a couple of dunks even in the March Madness tournament, which is obviously a little unheard of on the women's side. But she was just super dominant, absolutely dominant. Had a couple of double-doubles, averaged over 5 blocks a game during the tournament. I don't know if we'll ever see something like that again either.
Yeah, like you said, I think the most important thing here is that she was probably one of the most dominant forwards ever in college basketball, if not the most dominant. And I'm even putting her up there on the level with Breanna Stewart, because we all talked about her when she was with UConn.
Yep.
I would put Brittney Griner a step ahead, and nobody talked about Griner like they did Stewart. So I think she's overlooked as well, and definitely should go down as one of the best, at least forwards of all time in college basketball.
Yeah, and remember, we're talking college basketball, because if you look at their pro careers, it's pretty easily Breanna Stewart, right? Like that's not really a conversation, but their college careers was something different. She led that Baylor team to a 40-0 record. So that doesn't, that's obviously a little outside March Madness too. We're just talking about March Madness, but they were undefeated for the entire season. No NCAA team, men's or women's, had ever done that before, and no team has done it since. So it just shows you, again, in college basketball, how dominant Brittney Griner was. Just insane.
Exactly. Well said.
Well said. So that'll wrap up the episode for us today, though. Again, want to thank everyone for watching, listening, subscribing, liking. Again, that really helps out the channel. Make sure you go pay attention to the lives on TikTok that Jake is going to be doing every weekday leading up to March Madness. Let us know your bracket picks and who you think could be a sleeper in this year's tournament, maybe even a player that you think could top one of these performances this year.